Welcome to today's webcast, Leveraging Analytics to Prepare for the Future, sponsored by Workday and Deloitte. I'm Jess Bozzo, and I'll be your MC. Before we get started, I'll cover a few features of the console. On the left-hand side, you'll be able to view slides and polling questions during the webcast. You'll be able to download a PDF version of today's slides by clicking on the link in the resource list icon area. You'll also see a link to upcoming in-person events from Argyle. You can learn more about our upcoming CFO events by clicking on the link. We invite you to ask questions at any time during today's webcast in the Q&A area of your console. We've set aside some time following today's panel to address your questions. You'll also have the opportunity to earn a certificate for 1 CPE credit. To be eligible, you must respond to 3 polling questions that we'll have throughout the webcast, as well as remain on the line for the duration of today's webcast. Afterwards, if you are eligible to receive credit, you'll be able to click on an icon to download the certificate located in the certification section. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's featured speakers. During today's webcast, you'll hear from John Hugo with Workday. John joined Workday in 2015. Prior to Workday, John was Senior Vice President and Corporate Controller and Principal Accounting Officer at Lifetime Fitness, Inc., a Minneapolis, Minnesota-based healthy way of life company. Prior to Lifetime Fitness, John held accounting and financial leadership roles at Completel Europe NV, Jones Intercable, Inc., and he started his career at Arthur Andersen. Also on the line today, we're excited to have Matt Schwenderman with Deloitte. Matt has spent his career designing and delivering technology services and solutions to help companies across a variety of industries enable their financial and management reporting, consolidation, planning, budgeting, and forecasting. He also serves as an engagement leader and subject matter advisor in all areas of finance transformation to Deloitte's CFO program. Last but not least, we're excited to have Joe Hanlon with BMO Financial Group. Joe is the Divisional CFO for BMO's U.S. Personal and Commercial Bank, headquartered in Chicago, having moved to this role from BMO's Transportation Finance Unit based in Dallas, Texas. Prior to BMO, Joe was the CFO for GE Capital Equipment Finance. Joe spent 29 years with GE in a series of finance roles in credit, controllership, pricing, and M&A before performing divisional CFO roles in leveraged lending and equipment leasing and lending. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to Matt to start us off with some remarks that will set the stage for today's panel discussion. Welcome, Matt. Over to you.
Thank you, Jess, and welcome everybody to our webinar today. As mentioned, we're going to talk about the role of analytics and particularly the importance that analytics is taking on in this new digital economy. The focus today is on the role of the CFO and the finance function, how that is evolving, and the importance of capabilities and technologies in performing that role. What I'd like to do to start, though, is to kind of reset the table a little bit from the last webinar that John and I participated on, which was we talked a little bit about finance 2025 and finance in a digital world. And one of the things that it's good to ground ourselves in is as we all look around us, there's just this continued exponential growth of data, the use of smarter algorithms with learning capabilities in it, the faster processing speeds and technology, and the unbelievable drop in cost for these capabilities. And I bring that up because this is a scenario where it doesn't just affect our businesses, it affects our personal lives. If you look at what you can do on your smartphone versus what used to require a bank of computers to do in a short period of time, and how what we can do at home in our personal lives is in some ways much more advanced to what we can do in our work tasks in the finance function. And so what that presents for the finance function and the CFO is this change where we're trying to figure out how do we support a business that is increasingly digital and has access to the capabilities, is engaging with customers in new and exciting ways, is becoming much more efficient in this supply chain. And yet our finance function is operating with a lot of the same tools and processes we had before. So how do I support that business, but at the same time, how do I leverage these disruptors to improve what I do as a function and the value that I bring to an organization, which is ultimately driving what we see as a shift in kind of these three key questions for finance talent in a digital world. First is, what's our role? Like, as things evolve, what are we going to be doing? What's the work? How are we going to manage it? Who do we need to do that work, right? And how do we harness, these disruptive technologies to support the new roles and to allow the workers with their talents and the enhanced expectations to do that in a more efficient way? And what we're seeing, Deloitte is seeing across our client base, is folks are either becoming kind of paralyzed by this challenge and not necessarily knowing how to react or reacting quickly enough, or seeing that this is an opportunity to really embrace and move forward. We obviously think that you should be looking at the opportunities here. It's not going to be without, some daunting hurdles. But if we don't take them head on, it certainly will be detrimental to the function as well as the organization. So looking at these impacts, looking at these questions, we endeavored over the last year or so to take a look at what will finance look like in 2025. And we gave you a preview of that, about 6-8 months ago. And we've kind of refined it, and we also pressure tested it with CFOs, controllers, VPs of finance. And what we found is that there was a high degree of acceptance to what we had in our projections. In pretty much every case, 75% or greater of the respondents felt that these predictions were highly likely to come true. And these predictions really come down into these 8 categories. And because we covered them before, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them today. We'll highlight them a little bit. I encourage you to go to our Deloitte, our Deloitte website and check out our Crunch Time 5 thoughtware, where we go into more detail on these. But at a high level, right, the predictions that we had is so that, automation, blockchain is really going to create this finance factory. So we're going to go beyond creating efficiencies through shared services and really move much more closely to touchless transactions. The advent of touchless transactions is going to necessarily change the role of finance. And we have this framework, the 4 phases of the CFO, that we've had since 2006. And in that decade plus, that framework hasn't changed. What we've seen is with the advent of these disruptors is that the finance function is finally moving closer and closer to the strategist and catalyst roles and out of the steward and operator roles, not in their importance, but in the amount of time they spend on each. And that's what the role of finance is talking about. Finance cycles will start to blur. It'll be less periodic in nature for finance, and it'll be more of a real-time, ongoing insights, adding transaction processing scenario. Self-service will become the norm. If you think of how you use chatbots and how you use search engines and machine learning to find what you need in your daily personal life, those capabilities will be and are being introduced to the finance function and to reporting and analysis in general. Operating models will evolve. We will continue to see the convergence of human intelligence and artificial intelligence working together to fulfill the role and the needs of finance. And with that, we will have to have a change in how we actually structure and deliver what we do. So enterprise resource planning, I think this is an interesting one. The original flow of ERP provided us a lot of efficiency, a lot of capture around data, but didn't necessarily provide us much in analytics and insights. I'm sure John will want to talk about this later, but that is the wave of the future. The wave of the future is, how do I move from processing data to consuming and analyzing data? And then while we're talking about data, the one thing that we don't see changing is the challenges of wrangling data. and we'll talk about that in a second. The thing that will change substantially is who is doing the work and where they are doing the work. That is a high level, or is the Finance 2025. Again, for more detail, as I said, please go check it out and download it from our website. But specifically, as we look forward and the topic we're talking about today, the importance of analytics will continue to take on, and analytic capabilities will continue to take on more center stage. And we believe that finance is well suited by the role of finance in an organization, the process and logical approach that finance professionals take, as well as the history of doing insights for an organization, is well positioned and conceived to take on an enhanced role and to really drive the adoption of advanced analytic capabilities in an organization as we move forward to the middle of the next decade. And to highlight that, or to dive down on that, we're going to talk a little bit about three of the predictions: the role of finance data and the workforce required. So first, let's talk about the role of finance. So I mentioned that, what we mean by this is that as the operation side of what we do gets more automated, there's more of a touchless component. Blockchain evolves. ERP solutions become more integrated. Okay, is that the work of finance is going to be much more around integrating, just-in-time information into management processes. So making decisions faster, smarter, more relevant to the business. Okay, so really moving to that business partner role. In order to do that, right, we have to free up our folks from the time that they spend so that they can be more proactive around information. They can spend less time doing, what I like to call that human middleware work, and really start to shift into the analysis role, the predictive modeling role, and also getting closer to the business and really understanding different parts of the business. And from a workplace standpoint, we need to encourage and we need to look at ways to drive agility and co-location with those business users. Now, when we say co-location, that will not always mean I'm sitting side by side with you. Again, some of the advances in digital technologies will mean that co-location could be technologically enabled through, through web conferences, video conferences, other ways to share data quickly. But in any regard, we need to be ready for the fact that our organization is not going to be sitting on the fourth floor in a bunch of cubicles, and needs to be a bit more pervasive through the organization. So with that as a starter, I'm going to turn it back over to Jess. We have our first polling question.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Matt. This first polling question says, with operations automated, finance will double down on business insights and service. You'll see the answer options for this question are strongly agree, somewhat disagree, strongly disagree, or not sure. We'll ask that you please take a few moments to select your answer. As a reminder for those attendees seeking credit for today, you'll need to answer 3 polling questions. This is our first one. We'll leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow everyone a chance to respond. And then once we close this question down, we'll share the results and have Matt make a few comments before moving on. So please go ahead and select your final answer here. And what we'll do now is go ahead and take a look at the results. Let's see how they stack up here. Matt, any thoughts before you go ahead and share your own survey data?
I guess my first thought is I'm glad to see that those are the results based on what we surveyed as well. I think if I forward, I think we're looking at 85% of the folks agree or strongly agree. I think I don't know, the 15% that are in disagree and not sure. It could be because of what we are concerned about, which is if you look at our results, when we polled finance executives, this was a question where 82% agreed at some level. But we also said that in our prediction that success is not assured. And the reason we said success is not assured is in order for finance to take on this role that is very important, and I think we're moving down the path of, we need to remove some roadblocks. And so, our takeaway for this, this prediction and this topic, right, is that, if you buy into and agree that, knowledge sharing across disciplines is good and important, even though it creates headaches, right, you have to figure out the way to, to blur those boundaries and to remove those hurdles. And so two things that we would recommend you doing. One is identify the folks that are really, really good at this. Try and develop clones, if you will, around them. Help them train less experienced folks. Hold them up as examples of what you're looking for, right? And then secondly is as we blur these boundaries, right, and finance is not making the decisions by themselves anymore. We need to understand and build some decision rights and some rules of the road and guiding principles around how we want information consumed, what we're going to base decisions on, and how that plays out. The last thing I'll say here is that, we can start to employ algorithms and other technologies and data scientists to make the routine more efficient, to add insight to what we're doing and advance the maturity of it. But there's one down there in the green, there's one word there, storytellers. Finance needs to improve their ability to tell the story around what is happening and why it's happening. That will ultimately allow us to be more effective in the future and continue to elevate the role in the organization. Second topic I wanted to cover is data. Better analytics obviously requires better data. Now, that means I probably require more inputs than I get today. Those inputs are likely of different types than I've used in the past, and I need to improve the quality over time. Because of that, even though there's going to be standardization and the ability to pass data a bit more effectively and efficiently between technologies, we're still going to struggle with this. Right? We're going to struggle with the explosion of information. Like, how do I, on the work side, how do I know what to use? So quality isn't just, does that data represent what it said, but is that data even relevant to what I need? Okay. On the workforce side, I need skills and resources in finance I don't have today around this. I need people who can be evangelists for this data, who understand the way I move it and manipulate it, people who can be stewards and interact with IT and the rest of the organization. And within the workplace, you'll see down there that we talk about tone at the top. And prioritizing data governance and the importance of quality is something that has kind of gotten lost at the higher levels of many of our clients and organizations, and really need to understand that in the future, which has begun, that this is one of the critical barriers that you have to address on an ongoing basis. So when we pressure tested this, probably not a surprise, this was the one prediction where we had the largest agreement across all of our finance participants. Over 90% of the people surveyed believe that they're still going to be struggling with cleaning up data and dealing with data in the new world order, regardless of the tools and technologies that exist. So what do we do about that? So in the takeaways, I said, one of the things I said is make this an issue and a priority now. Like, don't wait. Start working towards it. Start chunking away at it a little bit of a time, right? Some of the other predictions may be slower to be realized, and one of the reasons why we picked 2025 and not 2020 or 2022, is some of these technologies have to evolve. This doesn't need to evolve. This is happening right now. Other parts of the organization are dealing with large data sets, disparate data sets, and are actively working through this issue. Finance needs to jump into the fray. Okay, so you see there's a couple things you can do. Basically get your finance technology team together and those responsible for data management. Do a review of what you have. Okay, start to identify areas of pressing needs and start improving on that a little bits at a time. I would also add in here, start to develop a relationship with the larger organization around data governance. If you don't have a data governance team and strategy for the larger organization, and you search yourself, potentially take that on as a goal and objective. Last, we're not going to get anywhere with analytics and the improving analytics without addressing, in 2025, without addressing the changes in workforce in the workplace. Okay, so the reality is that improving the capabilities in the digital world to enhanced analytics requires new roles, new skills, but it can also be very attractive, right? So the work is not going to be, it can be very engaging and interactive. It can't be done in silos, okay? And like when we look at organizations that we consider digital natives, they grew up in this digital world, the finance function is very much embedded with other, so with supply chain and marketing and whatnot, and the roles have a lot of integration and intertwining of roles and responsibilities between the others. That we have to take the legacy organizations and move them in that direction. The workforce itself, finance needs to start looking at how do I retrain what I have, but more importantly, how do I attract new skills that I need? Data scientists, folks who can do algorithms, folks who really understand how to leverage these technologies in the right way, or more importantly, in an efficient and effective way. We also have to recognize that not everybody is quote unquote retrainable. And so how do you find a role for those folks in your new organization and moving forward? Because your team will be looking at you and looking at how you invest in everybody. When pressure testing this one, this was, I think, one of our second highest in terms of agreement, and more importantly, only 1% disagreed with it, in a strong way. So that we thought that showed a lot of alignment, and there's a lot of takeaways. There's a lot of things you can do. I think for right now, what we're basically saying is just recognize that this is going to probably be one of the more difficult things that you deal with. Implementing new tools and technologies is relatively easy compared to changing your talent model and your operating model and imparting those cultural shifts, right? So start a plan now for where you need to go over the long haul. Work with HR to help define those requirements. Think about how you move people up the maturity and capability curve. If you want them to be more collaborative, if you want them to take on those business partnering roles, you need to find ways to recognize and reward people for operating that way, for operating more as, in teaming ways than in auditing ways, if you will. And more importantly, your team, as well as yourself, are going to be uncomfortable through this transition. So be comfortable being uncomfortable, and find ways to model that and to reward people and recognize them for taking risks and signing up for things that you may need them to do. So that's kind of a lot of verbiage, some of it, pretty philosophical. So what does this actually look like? And I will give you an example of something that's not that far off. We've actually been piloting this internally and with some clients. And the phrase that we've used for the site is combinatorial innovation, and don't shoot me through the phone for a consulting phrase here. But we're really trying to show that all of these forces acting together is what's driving the future of finance, and then as a subset of that, which is enabling a different level of analytics. And what you see mapped out here, you can already do. You can do this at home. You can do this on your smartphone. And we're showing clients how you can do this within finance, right? So you have somebody who poses a question to a chatbot or to an Alexa. That chatbot, or natural language processing will then synthesize that request, hit the targeted database or application, reproduce the answer in the visualization software, right, and then provide a summary of that. You can provide it in an email or some other way. And all of that is coordinated and organized, with RPA technologies and servers that pass the variables back and forth. So what does all that mean? That means I can pick up my phone and I can say into my phone, there's the phone. I can talk into my natural language processing conveyor, or I can type into a chatbot, give me 3 years trailing sales for all my stores in the central region, and it will not just repeat that back, but it'll then synthesize it, and it'll learn from it, and it'll say, do you want same store sales, or do you want variable sales? Do you want seasonally impacted or non-seasonally impacted? And take you through those series of questions and then give the results back. Those are things that we've already been able to demonstrate. That's a simplistic example of how these tools and technologies are coming together, but obviously all the things we talked about previously have to happen in order for this to be done well. And the reason I say you can already do that is because we can already talk into the phone and ask for directions somewhere, and it will give us 3 choices of how to get there, and it'll tell us which one's the fastest. That is capability. Those are capabilities that are available to us in the analytics and reporting function within finance. And so with that, we're going to move into our panel discussion, but I believe Jess has another polling question first.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt, for a great session. Super helpful to have you tee up some of those key topics that we'll be talking about in just a moment here. But before we do get to the panel, as Matt said, we do have our second polling question. This one says, our finance team has the skills and capabilities to succeed in the age of digital disruption. The answer options for this question are strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, or I don't know. Just like last time, we'll ask that you please take a few moments to select your answer here. As a reminder for those attendees seeking credit for today, you'll need to answer all 3 polling questions. Again, this is our second one. We'll leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow everyone a chance to respond. And then once we close this question down, we'll transition over to today's panel discussion. Friendly reminder while we're giving everyone a second here to select their final answer. As mentioned in the beginning, we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions for Matt or for John or Joe after we get into today's panel, please do chat those in. So John, would you mind just giving us a bit more information on your background before we get started today?
Sure, Jess. Thank you very much, and nice job, Matt. My name is John Hugo. I'm VP of Financial Products at Workday. Like Jess mentioned earlier in my background, I've spent about 25 years in the accounting and finance area. When I was corporate controller at Lifetime Fitness, we were a very early adopter of Workday. We were customer number 12, and one of the first public companies to go live with Workday's financial suite and the entire platform. So I joined Workday 3 years ago, and I speak with controllers and finance teams and CFOs about the Workday financial products.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And Joe, a bit more background on yourself would be great as well.
Sure. My name is Joe Hanlon. I'm the CFO for BMO Harris Bank's U.S. Personal and Commercial Bank. I've been with the bank for about 3 years, having come in through the acquisition of GE's transportation business from from GE Capital by BMO back at the end of 2015, where I had been the CFO for that platform. I spent the bulk of my career with GE and GE Capital, having started there back in 1987. And Jess, don't tell me you weren't born yet. I know, I'm old. I get it. But I came through a series of finance roles that were really a great training platform for me, having done controllership, financial planning, business development, pricing, and kind of working my way up to CFO roles within GE, and then seeing multiple divisions across the company. It's been a great ride, and it prepared me very well for what I'm doing now, and still getting myself up to speed and learning how a bank works. I've been a lender for a long time, and I'm starting to learn the deposit side, so it's been a fun and exciting couple of years here.
Excellent. Well, thank you both there. As mentioned, I'll be posting some questions out to our great panel today. Again, if you guys do have questions for each specific panelist or even as a group based on Matt's presentation, please do chat those in. And again, we'll save some time after today's panel. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Something Matt talked about a lot was the role of the CFO. So Joe, let's start with you here. Would love to hear how you've seen your role evolve over the last few years and maybe how it's grown to a larger role in the strategic growth and direction of the company.
Sure, and my role's been a little bit different with each of the divisions that I've supported over time. But what has been a very common theme in the past couple of years is that change continues to accelerate. We've seen things in the last 10 years that we never thought we'd see. Some of them we hoped we'd never see, but they've all created challenges that we've had to address and deal with. What really is interesting is that the finance organization, from my perspective, can no longer be the scorekeepers. They can't just communicate the results at the end of the period and feel like they've done their job. Our analytical skills are very much needed within our businesses to help interpret data live time and inform the businesses as to the implications of competing choices. We're increasingly needed at the table as part of the business leadership, helping to assess courses of action, predict outcomes, and then track and make corrections as strategic projects play out. The key really is from my perspective, again, is to make certain that everyone on the team understands how the business makes money. What are the levers of profitability and what can be done to generate income? I have seen too many businesses over time that focus on and compensate for metrics that are more activity-based, like sales volume, without understanding how the different populations of sales may translate into profitability and the risk and reward trade-offs. And I think that we are more and more needed live time, not after the fact, to help make decisions, not just keep score.
That's great. Thanks so much, Joe. And something that Joe just shared and commented on was kind of the importance of an analytical mindset. I want to continue on this thread we have going here. And John, I'm going to start with you here. Would love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing with the importance of analytics that Joe just mentioned for finance teams, and how analytics are really helping to support that digital operating model that Matt kind of teed up for us in his opening remarks.
Sure, thanks. And I agree with Joe's comments on that first question you had, Jess. But first of all, for me to have truly successful analytics and insight, I think you need to have, the tools and the technology to have the information truly real time. And Joe mentioned that real time aspect as well, and have it at your fingertips. And I'm not talking about the legacy where you have functional silos and hundreds of linked spreadsheets together and inputs from third-party systems. And then you have a team of analysts that pull or push all of that information into a data mart or a data warehouse. And then their role is compiling that information. And by the time the data is finally aggregated, it's stale and it's old data. So when I talk about real time, it's information and transactions that really just happened minutes or seconds ago and having that available right now in a single location. So I think if you spend any amount of time trying to reconcile information to make sure it's validated and accurate, then you're already behind. So for our team, analytics are extremely important to Workday's finance team because the information helps helps our team make business decision based on today's or tomorrow's information, not last week. So that real-time concept is extremely important, and it makes a huge difference in how we operate.
That's great. Thanks, John. You answered my second part of that question about timely and accurate insights. Joe or Matt, do either of you want to follow up? Joe, maybe, why it's important for you. I know you mentioned that. Or Matt, even what you're seeing as well?
Sure. The one thing I would say is, when you reached out for this topic, what was interesting to me is, this is something we're trying to tackle every day. Didn't get involved because we're really good at this and I've got something to sell you in terms of how we did it. I'm trying to figure out how to get better at this because our tools are not where we'd like them to be. Mm-hmm. We just continue to try to get smarter about which elements are the critical few and drive focus on those. But, to me, it's really interesting to see some of the things that are becoming possible to figure out where to go next.
That's great.
Add on to that a little bit is, one of the reasons I think this is becoming that much more important is the cycle time. Joe alluded to this, but the cycle time that you have to make decisions and make good decisions to basically have an edge in the market and over your competition continues to be compressed. That's the bad news. The good news is that the technologies that are available today start to break down some of the barriers that made us have longer times to get the information. The information was disparate, and quite frankly, some of the advents, with social media and IoT is just generating insights that we didn't have before. And so, we've been talking to clients, and I was in industry before going into consulting, and this is not a new idea or desire for finance. So there's probably a lot of people out there saying, I've heard this before, I think the inflection point, though, is, that the doubling rule is heavily in effect here, right? And we don't have time to wait around for reasonably good answers. We have to have real-time, meaningful insights, and we have to put them into place faster. And so, fortunately, that we're starting to see the ability of pulling some of these technologies together to do that. And as Joe mentioned, the trick for any organization is how do I pivot from my legacy processes, people, and capabilities to what's available now. And ultimately, that's what drives any organization's long-term success is that ability to absorb change.
Absolutely.
Hey, Matt,
thanks so much.
This is John. Yeah, I was just going to add something on time there. I like to put time on the balance sheet, and I think before we had access to real-time information, time used to be a liability. Everybody on the call is an accountant. I don't have time for analysis because I'm closing the books, but I think now with immediate access to real-time data, we look at time as an asset because all of a sudden you have time. You're not closing the books. You're having that time to do analysis. So it's actually becoming an asset and not a liability like it used to be.
Excellent. Thanks so much, John and Matt there. Joe as well for your thoughts. Matt, I would like to continue the thread on with you here, talking about how finance teams are really looking to deliver those forward-looking predictive insights that help shape business strategy, but also kind of a part two to this question, how are you seeing teams fostering the culture and maintaining and building the infrastructure to really support that focus on being a data-driven team? I know when we chatted a bit earlier this week, you had some great examples to share about a specific client, so would love to hear any stories or your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, so maybe a couple of thoughts that are related to that. So first, and this is maybe more just an example, kind of a tactical example of what a client is doing. And so, what we're seeing, and it goes back to that one slide that I had where combining multiple capabilities and technologies together to advance a process or an insight area. So we have a client that is taking some unstructured source data, combining it with their financial information, historic financial information, and has built in some predictive algorithms with some cognitive learning capabilities, and is producing forward-looking forecasts. They piloted that with areas of the organization that represented a smaller percentage of the revenue share, and were able to document that those algorithms which were seeding rolling forecasts were giving them accuracy in the 90, lower to mid 90% range, which was about a 10% improvement over the historical, manual-driven, internally biased view. So once that was driven in, then the question becomes, the cultural question is, so how do I push that out to the larger organization? How do I get people to trust that, right? And I think, so that's kind of, a couple of the things. So one on the culture is, you cannot expect your organization to just turn around and say, oh yeah, these are new tools, this is going to work, I'm going to adopt it. It's just great, right? So you need proof points. And in this case, that client used a pilot, used a certain area as a proof point, and was able to show the differences. The second thing you have to do culturally is, I go back to the recognize and reward. So the folks that worked on that and were involved in that are more, we have organizations that will say, like, look, we're going to do a skunk works. We're going to do this over here. It's going to be separate. Other organizations will say, our culture is pretty dynamic and encourages change. So we're going to have these people work with another department, and we're going to hold them up as an example of what we want to do. You really need to assess what works well in your organization, and adopt that approach. So I think that it's, I'll just start that. I know Joe had talked a little bit about how, they're trying to make these advances, and maybe Joe, I'll hand it to you to say, like how does the culture work on your end? What have you guys seen work as you try to advance the ball, and what are some of the pitfalls you maybe have run against?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because, when you think about, the banking industry, right? So we have Federal Reserve requirements to present several stress tests under CCAR. And we use models for the bulk of that, and they're very predictive and they're very good over a long cycle given multiple scenarios. But when we get down to doing our own plan, they're not really great at telling you what's going to happen in Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. So we tend to do a whole separate process. And I'd like to, over time, see those two come together so that the elements that we're thinking about to do our plan that we do more as a management overlay, we start to take some of those thoughts and build them into the logic that builds out the CCAR testing, right? So that you could have a continually updating plan rather than an episodic, everybody sit down and review and go through it again together. I think it'd be a much more efficient method, but we're not yet there where we trust it yet, and we've got to see it prove out before I think we could move to it, full time. We're nowhere near there, by the way. I don't want to give people the ideas that we're like on the verge of that. Yeah. It's something that's out there that we keep looking at.
Yeah, and we just did there was one of my colleagues did another webinar recently, and this topic came up of, is finance really doing these things, and are they really looking at the ROI? And I think that's ultimately the key. Is like absolutely that finance is starting to think about how this all works. I don't think the question isn't whether finance believes this stuff works. The question is, how do I put all these new things together in the right way? And, to dovetail what Joe was saying, I think one of the ways that finance does it to get the buy-in in their own organization, their own department, as well as other functions, is by having some ROI component attached to it, right? And doing pieces at a time. it's folly to think that you're going to go to bed one day, get up the next day, and all of a sudden your organization is going to be doing predictive algorithms for all your forecasting and planning. But most of our organizations are already doing something along those lines in some portion of the business. And because, and the way they did that is by, investing in pilots, investing in projects, seeing it's an ROI, and then building on it. And finance has to have the same discipline and approach to move forward.
Absolutely. No, great stories there. I think that was a kind of a great kind of tangent to take there. And something I want to dive a bit deeper into, you guys all mentioned it in terms of creating an analytics culture, are really those skill sets that you're thinking about, that you want to hire for, that you think you're going to have to hire for in the future. So John, can I call on you here? Would love to hear your thoughts about
Sure.
what skill sets are necessary in creating that analytics culture we've been chatting so much about. Are you seeing finance hire differently than they have in the past? As we discussed before, I think when we chatted earlier this week, you also had a really great story to tell. So I'll call on you there.
Sure. And of course, this was one of the highlights of Matt's predictions for 2025, but I think these changes are happening a lot faster. The skill sets are definitely changing. I think at the core, if I hired a financial team, accountants, I think you still need to understand the basics, the debits and the credits, the key financial statements. But how you get there is, I think, what's really changing. I love the term technologically curious. I almost have that now as a prerequisite in any financial hires. You don't really need to understand the coding behind it, but you do have to have a curiosity about how the systems work to maximize efficiencies that all the new digital technologies are bringing up. And the best thing, in my opinion, is it's creating opportunities that didn't exist before. When I was at Lifetime Fitness, we had an AP clerk, maybe a 2-year degreed person who had been in her role for several years, but she was really, really good at what she did, and she understood the business processes extremely well. And when we moved to Workday, she actually went into a system support role because she had that business process experience that you need, the business experience, and she had the curiosity about technology and Workday and how to make the processes the most efficient they could be, and also leveraging new technology to do so. So for me, as the controller, it was extremely rewarding for me to see her succeed in that new role based on her curiosity. So I think technological curiosity, in my opinion, is one of those prerequisites that I think you should be looking at on financial hires.
This is Joe. I'm smiling as you describe that, because you're actually making me think of a guy that I worked with who was probably one of the best and most effective IT folks I worked with, who was actually a sales guy by background, who implemented a touchless process for application through approval to documents to funding of loans and leases for customers, because he was a guy who thought about it from the customer standpoint and holistically, and knew what all the steps were to get a deal through, because he had to get deals through, and got into IT and ended up being one of the best project managers I ever saw.
I agree, Joe. I think those people are out there, and it's just with the fast-paced technology changes, it is going to create opportunities for those types of employees.
It wasn't the answer I had been thinking of for this topic, but I'll tell you that what I tend to do when I interview people, and it's not just around data and technology curiosity, although I love that and I'm going to start using it. I look for people who generally have an accounting or a finance degree to start from, but not all accountants are going to be built for business-facing finance roles. I always look for candidates who can articulate not only what they do, but the strategy and profit model for the business they're with. I don't care what level they are, right? But if you work for somebody, you ought to know what they do and how they make money. And if you've worked somewhere for 2 or 3 years and you don't know that, you're probably don't have the right level of curiosity to be a thought leader.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can add on, I don't know much we have enough time, but just like a closing thought on this is I don't think the issue around finance talent and finding the right roles is going to be a long-term one. The reason I say that is, I just look at my own personal situation. I have 3 daughters. I got one that just entered college and 2 in high school. They are natively digital in everything they do and how they interact with technology, and it's not an ask or a challenge for them to say, I want you to incorporate your learning and what you're doing with technology and tools and things of that nature. The challenge that we have is over the next 5+ years is how do we get enough scale in our talent by updating, if you will, the skills of the folks that are in our organization, that know our organization, that have the internal knowledge that we need to lean on, but get them to upskill quickly. The second is, right now, the talent that finance and accounting traditionally drew from off the campuses there isn't kind of this integrated learning environment for them. So no one comes off campus saying, okay, I'm going into a role where I'm a data scientist in finance. We have like data scientist roles and we have finance and accounting roles. And so it's going to be finding those people, the technologically curious ones. It's going to be finding folks that maybe took, a couple, did a minor in MIS and a major in accounting or vice versa, and kind of putting them in roles early in their career that you may have originally waited till they had more experience, because they're coming in with a blend of skills that you can't wait to build. So talent's always a challenge, but I think this specific issue will be one that over time the market will drive, that you'll be able to find it in more abundance, as will the demographics of the folks coming into the market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't bypass when I say technologically curious. I mentioned that in an in-person panel a couple of months ago, and another panelist mentioned, but you also need business curiosity. And I think this is a perfect example of the new millennials coming in with all of this wonderful ambition around new technology, and marrying that with those of us like myself, Matt, and Joe probably have, I'm going to do quick math, but 75+ years of business experience, and putting that together. And I think together that absolutely makes a perfect team. So marrying that technological with the experience, we're hitting a really strong point here.
Absolutely. And on my side, I'm just keeping a quick eye on the time here. We've been having such a robust conversation. I think what I'd like to do as kind of a nice way to wrap up is just ask each of our panelists. I know we were just kind of sharing there, Matt, you had some great insights, obviously, in your thought leadership deck as well. But what you guys are what do you see, where do you see the future going as it relates to finance and the finance role, as a whole? So maybe Joe, can we start with you and kind of where you're thinking about your team will go in the future?
Sure. As we continue to get more sophisticated in our use of digitization, right, our teams will shift in terms of the work effort, and I'm just restating a lot of stuff that's been said here, right? But as I think of our processes today, we've got people on our teams that are strategic leaders, those who are thinking about where to go, architects who are designing on how to get there, and then builders who prepare like the beta version of whatever reports or analyses we do. And then we've got manual labor, the people who actually create the reports. And they're all on our finance teams today. Many years ago, companies started outsourcing the manual labor aspect, the production aspect of it. And our outsourcing partners, the good ones at least, are in many cases taking the lead in streamlining and or digitizing those manual processes we shifted to them. We need to continue to review within our own shops, what is the repetitive work that should be outsourced or digitized, and what is the value-added work that we can and should be focused on. And we've got to do that in concert with the business teams that we support. because ultimately we're a service organization. We're here to aid the business in decision making and helping them communicating their strategy and results. And if we are always focused on how to do that the best we can, we'll be making the right choices.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. John, over to you.
Sure, and I'm going to take one of Matt's 2025 predictions where he had the finance factory, because I think that's going to happen sooner. So I think there's a two-word saying, and I'm going to change one word. I'm going to say stuff happens, okay? But for finance and accounting teams of the future, I think we're going to get closer and closer to having, quote, accounting happens. I like to think of it as sometime in the not-too-distant future, and I think it's going to be before 2025. We're simply going to push the big self-close button. There's going to be automated dependencies. It's going to trigger a series of transactions with no or very minimal human intervention. And then on the second day of the month, we're going to have accurate and automatic audited financial information available. And then we'll have 30 days for analytics. How's that? That's my dream state, and I think we're building products that's going to make that a reality before 2025.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Joe and John. And last but not least, Matt, I know you already teed up some great predictions for us, but if you could leave our audience with maybe just one or two, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I think we did the predictions. I think, to me, this all comes down to finance used to be the lead driver in an organization at pushing change and adopting new technologies, and we've kind of ceded that role to other functions that are either closer to the customer or closer to operations. I think this is the point at which finance has the opportunity to become more of that leader in the organization again and really help the organization figure out where to spend their money. There's a plethora of investments our organizations can make, and success is not solely going to be based on making them, but making the right ones. And the other thing that I would say is what we are focused on is helping finance be a little less cautious and a little more prudent in taking risks and moving the ball forward. So those would be two things. I think that the new environment is going to favor the bold, but it's only going to favor the bold who go into it with a good framework for evaluating, making the right decisions, and then doubling down on those that work.
Excellent. Well, I can't thank you all enough for your great insights and expertise that you were able to share today. It was truly a pleasure for me to kind of listen along as you guys were each taking us through those answers to those questions there. So thank you all so much. Without further ado, what I'd like to do now is go ahead and take a look at the third and final polling question here. This one says, which of the macro trends discussed today do you anticipate will have the biggest impact on the future of finance? These relate back to Matt's session from earlier, so you can see the answer options here are exponential growth of data, smarter algorithms, reduced computing costs, or faster processing speeds. Just like the other two polls, we'll ask that you please take a few moments to select your answer. Again, friendly reminder for those attendees seeking credit for today, you'll need to answer 3 questions, and this is our third and final one. We'll leave this question up for a few more seconds here before we go ahead and close out today's webcast. So please go ahead and make your final selection here. Just due to where we are with time, we're not going to have a discussion around today's results. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is just say a big thank you again to each of our 3 speakers, John, Matt, and Joe. Again, thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon. And of course, a big thank you today to Workday, to Deloitte, to Joe for joining us as well. A big thank you again to all of our attendees for joining us as well, for leveraging analytics to prepare for the future. We hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day.